No? All right then, let's get started. Welcome to Tulare County Voices at 210. I'm Paul Hurley. Donna, right? Tough crowd. Yeah, is this mic on? Are you sure? I see my reputation precedes me. I am part of the planning team for this group that is co-sponsored by the Visalia Times Delta and First Presbyterian Church, which owns this building and the space you're in now. We are very grateful to First Press every month for allowing us free use of this space for our monthly forums. Tulare County Voices at 210 is a monthly forum dedicated to a free exchange of ideas and opinions and proposals related to issues of interest to our community. And, well, we usually don't convene in August, do we, Melinda? Huh? But we thought, well, let's do something special. And so rather than our usual forum, we decided to do something very special and devote this evening to a conversation with Greg Collins.
I'm ahead so far.
You know, we'll see you later there, Greg. I got a microphone too. Greg is here to talk about his book, 7 Generations. I don't remember the rest of the title if I haven't got it in front of me. There you go. Which he just wrote, which is part memoir, part geological study, part history, and part proposal for what we do for our water situation in our valley. Greg Collins does not need any introduction, certainly not for me. However, I will introduce him as Visalia's original, maybe last, Renaissance man. Greg, does that count for me or you? Can we split that one?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Good.
We'll split that one. Greg is a biologist, a scholar. Of course, you know him as a policymaker, a politician, an office holder here in Visalia. I wanted to say 40 years, but he corrected me earlier and said 31. I think he's just trying to, shave a few years off his hairline, maybe. How many years on the Visalia City Council and many times mayor. He is also an athlete, a water polo athlete. He's a fly fisherman, most recently. A hydrologist, an historian. I'm leaving a couple of things out here. I think an urban planner by profession. Yeah, I shouldn't let that one out because that's how he made his living, right? And a couple of other things besides. So I could probably go on a little bit more about Greg Collins. Well, actually, no, I don't think I can. So I will just turn it over now to a conversation with Greg Collins.
Thank you, Paul. I understand that these gatherings are not often held in August, but since it's not 100 degrees and only 90, I think that's a good thing to celebrate. Thank you, Paul, for that introduction, and thank you to the Times Delta for a nice introduction article that I think got some people out. And Catherine, thank you from the Valley Voice, and obviously 210 Connect providing the venue to discuss matters of public interest. A couple introductions. I have my wife in the front row, Dorothy. Raise your hand. And my sister and brother-in-law, Devin and Bob. And many close friends throughout the crowd. So this will be more like a fireside chat than a speech. So hopefully it goes that way. A couple of preliminary comments that I'd like to make before I get into my PowerPoint. Item number one, who is James Holloway? None of you have ever met him, but he's my best friend. And we ran into each other at UCSB. He was a goalie and I was a field player, and I was responsible for throwing the balls past him, and he was responsible for blocking them. So we got our first introduction in water, playing water polo together, and became lifelong friends, and we seemed to be always involved with water. From there, we swim together, we body surf together, we ski together, and most recently, Jim got me into fly fishing, and we've been fly fishing on the Sacramento River. And at one of those times, I was sort of musing as I was waiting for a strike. The Sacramento is quite impressive. We were catching trout, steelhead, big salmon were going under our boats. The riparian woodland along the Sacramento is very lush, bald eagles flying over. And of course, I'm familiar with the Kauai River, the Kern River, the Kings River, and obviously they don't have those same kind of attributes. And so one of the questions is, why not? A number of folks have asked me why I decided to write a book. Well, when I went off council, I didn't have much to do. I still work a little bit. The fact that I had just gone off the local GSA, Mid-Kauai GSA, where I got a wonderful education in water from many hydrologists and scientists that is their profession. Served with so many good people on that particular board. There's a couple in the audience here. And so I got a real education on water. So it came to me that maybe I should write a book. My background is biology. I'm a city planner, but I also taught ecology. And so Jim and I got together and I said, why don't we write a book? Jim is an economist. I'm an ecologist. You can only imagine the paragraphs going back and forth. You can't say that. That's stupid, you know. And he says, no, I'm an economist. It's the right thing to say. So we had a lot of back and forth on the preparation of this book. And we wanted to write a book that was sort of educational in nature, provocative in that we wanted to get people to think about water in our valley, and also provide some solutions. I've been a city planner for 40 years and on the council. Jim was a community development director in San Clemente for 30 years. And every day we're just used to solving problems with developers or homeowners or districts or other cities that have politicians that you have to react with. And so our life is spent solving problems. And so we thought, well, let's sort of set the stage here in terms of giving some historical context on this place we call the Tulare Lake Basin, provide some history, try to frame the issue, and surface questions for the reader that may generate some conversation. The other thing we wanted to do, and I'll go over this in my PowerPoint, is provide some real-world solutions after spending a couple of years writing this book, and hopefully that will be embraced by some of the GSAs that operate in the Tulare Lake Basin. There's also a couple of chapters I just inserted to generate some real conversation, especially among the farming community. There's an old saying, whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting. I don't know who said that. Probably after this presentation, some of the farming folks may need a shot of whiskey, but that's okay. So a little bit about the Tulare Lake Basin. Let me see if this works. I'm hitting the arrow. Oh. I guess I better look up. The picture doesn't. Okay. Great. So the Tulare Lake Basin, a lot of people know this area as the San Joaquin Valley, but the Tulare Lake Basin is the southern half of the San Joaquin Valley. It contains 4 counties, Fresno, Kern, Kings, and Tulare. And it has some interesting features. During the 1860s, the size of Tulare Lake exploded to the size of 790 square miles, making it the largest body of water west of the Mississippi. The basin is fed by 4 rivers, the Kings, the Kern, the Kaweah, and the Tule, and many smaller creeks that we're all familiar with. It has a wonderful soil, and that comes from millions of years of alluvium coming off the Sierras and filling up the lake bottom. For you trivia folks, one of the largest or the greatest vertical drop of water in the United States is on the Kaweah River. It starts at 13,000 and stops around 200 feet. So I thought that was interesting. It's an ideal place for agriculture in that you have alluvium, which is rich. You have a source of water, your surface water, and the 2 aquifers that lie under the basin. One is called a confined water. That's under the Corcoran clay layer, and above it is the regular aquifer. So we have a number of sources of water. We also have a number of growing days, and so you put all that together, and it makes for probably the richest agricultural region in the world. The top 3 agricultural counties in the country are Tulare was first this year, followed by Fresno and Kern, and I think Kings is 5 or 6. So it's to get a grasp on water. First of all, I've provided where our water comes from: surface water, groundwater. And also rainfall. We've been blessed with 2 good years. We had a gully washer in 2023, set all sorts of records, and this year was above average. But over the 118 years that irrigation districts have been collecting data, it falls into different categories. You have your wet, your above normal, below normal, dry, and critical. So we've all experienced in this room a critical couple of years. We've all experienced wet years, but any given year you roll the dice and you get one of these. And oftentimes after this latest great year in water, people say, well, the drought is over. You only need to look at that and realize next year could be a drought that may last a number of years. I wanted to start with the natural environment, which, being a biologist, I'm always interested in, so I've done a lot of reading. The Tulare Lake Basin was almost like a Serengeti for California. In the early days, the early pioneers and explorers indicated that there were grizzly bear and antelope and elk and beavers in the river, numerous species of fish in the lake and in our rivers, salmon being one of them, but they no longer exist. So it's really a very impressive area in terms of wildlife. I was reading the paper a couple of weeks ago and noted that the Yokuts up in the reservation released beavers into the North Fork of the Tule, which I thought was very interesting, given much of the river was occupied by beavers and otters and what have you. And it must have been an exciting place. You talk to early hunters who would be out in the lake with their shotguns, and they'd shoot up into the air and 10 ducks would fall out of the air. It was that thick. The indigenous people, the Yokuts, obviously were the first to occupy this area. They came 15,000, 16,000 years ago, lived off the land. At one time, there was 25,000 indigenous people in the valley, stretching from Kern all the way up to the Lodi area. There are 25 different tribes, and obviously lived off the land in terms of gathering roots and bulbs, but also fishing and hunting. Unfortunately, with many of our indigenous people across the country, especially after the gold rush, a number of Indians lost their life, either being killed, dealing with disease, having their habitat removed or upended from their ceremonial grounds. So that in the late 60s, I believe, there's only 325 members of the Yokut tribe in existence, some out in the Lemoore area and up in the Tule River Indian Reservation. And of course, that was common with all the indigenous people across the country. The first economic enterprises that occurred in the valley were grazing, cattle grazing. That particular endeavor was fairly easy. The land was open. There were good grasses, obviously during the spring and early months. The cattle grazing changed the ecology of the valley, because with the early cattle that came with the Spanish and from the missions, they brought with them Mediterranean types of grasses that were not indigenous to this area. And so most of the grasses you see are not native to California. These are grasses that came over with the Spanish in the missions, and obviously in the cattle and the cattle feed. In the big flood of 1862 or 1868, essentially the cattle industry was wiped out. The entire valley flooded. That's when the lake exploded in size. I think in that time, the governor of California had to row a boat to the Capitol and get in the second story, because Sacramento was under 10 feet of water. So it was a very significant flood event. And from the cattle industry, they went to wheat. Again, the wheat industry involved leveling land and then planting wheat and hoping that it rained. At one time, Traver, interestingly enough, was like the wheat capital of the country, which is hard to believe. That was in the 1880s. From wheat, we transitioned into other commodities, obviously, that started with water. We had some early explorers. John C. Fremont was the first to survey this area along with Kit Carson. There are a number of other mountain men, I guess you'd call them, that came into the valley, primarily hunting beaver. But once that population was decimated, they moved on. George Derby was an early surveyor that came over in 1850, and there's actually a map of his survey in the book, and he circled the Tulare Lake Basin, actually came around to the Four Creeks area. It wasn't known as Visalia then. And interestingly enough, when I was looking at the map, there's a square there on the map, but no legend, no name for the square. Later on, I learned that he thought that would be a good place for a fort. And of course, in 1852, Fort Visalia did come to being. The first folks that peeked into the San Joaquin Valley, Father Garces, in 1776, Pedro Fagus, if I'm pronouncing that right, a little earlier. Interestingly enough, Father Garces were one of three fathers that followed Junipero Serra. So he was often conversing with Junipero Serra, who was traveling along the coast, and he stayed mostly in Arizona, Texas, and parts of California, opening this part of the world up. The next sort of bit of history, to begin any kind of farming operation, obviously you have to have the ability to sell land, and so the early surveyors, Fremont and Derby, came through, but after them, land began to be divided up and sold to people in California and people from the east. Interestingly enough, when the railroad came in the 1860s to the 1870s, they extended a line from the Sacramento area down to LA. For those of you that know your railroad history, the railroad's got every other section in every other section in a township, and so they had huge holdings going through the valley. They were probably the largest landowner in California by acreage. And it's interesting because they were given that land to push the railroad through. But their people at the top thought, okay, we've been given all this land. How can we make it more valuable than it is? And so the railroad was sort of some of the first interests in terms of creating orchards and the practice of irrigation, because they felt that if they could enhance the economic value of their property, of which they had much, they could turn a nice profit. And so they actually outfitted railroad cars with sort of an open lab of how you can grow these orchards in the valley, and they actually had demonstrations to do that. And so over a period of time, with their knowledge of irrigation and orchards and what have you, they began to sell extensive amounts of property in 20, 40, 80-acre parcels. They were also town builders. So a lot of the towns along the railroad were plotted or planned by the railroad, and they would actually market blocks and put in a water system and what have you. So they really were sort of the early land speculators, if you will, in terms of agricultural land and also city land. There's a wonderful book, and I don't know if John Austin is in the audience, but it's called Floods and Droughts. It's an interesting read. He documents water and floods and droughts for the last 1,200 years in the valley. The early scientific endeavors involved looking at tree rings and sediments, and obviously more recent times looking at old newspaper accounts in terms of what happened when certain flood events took place. Probably, given all the gray hair in the audience, some of you have lived or were here in 1955. I was only 6 years old, but I do remember it. That was the flood of 55. It was before the dam. And that was probably maybe 100-year event. In 1862 and 1868, we had two 200-year events. And it'll happen again, don't know when. But it essentially flooded the entire valley. Obviously, you had 10 feet of water in Sacramento, killed numerous cattle. But one of the interesting facts that I discovered for you Visayans is that the St. Johns River prior to 1862 was not a river. Supposedly there was a large brush dam up on the Cahuilla. It backfilled and found another avenue or channel, and that's how the St. Johns River was created. And then in 1868, another 200-year event, and so you got the water going down the St. Johns River. For those of you that have driven 99 over the years, and I look at that Cross Creek area, I've always wondered why there are no oak trees there. Where is the riparian woodland? Well, there's no riparian woodland because there wasn't a river before 1862. For some of you old farmer types out there, I've talked to some old farmers that would be disking their property, and their disc would hit some immovable object below ground, and they dig it up, and it would be a whole redwood tree. And in 1862 and probably in 1868, huge amounts of redwood came down the Sierras and obviously landed on the valley floor. And many of the ranchers would cut it up and use it as fence posts, which I thought was novel. So those were amazing events. In 2023, we had a gully washer, and it was always fun to pull up this satellite every month to see how the lake was expanding. Of course, it got a lot of play in the LA Times and the Chronicle, and how big is the lake going to be, and can you sail across it, and how many farms are underwater, and what are we going to do about it, et cetera, et cetera. But Mother Nature had its way, and it created a very large lake that didn't explode to the size of the 1862 or 1868 lake, but it got fairly sizable. I think it even got larger than that. And you're probably wondering, it doesn't look like a lake. It's sort of cut in half, and what's preventing that water to go the other directions? Well, obviously there are many farming interests out there. Boswell's probably the best known of the farming interests, but there are others. And so there's a series of levees out there that preclude the water from overflowing, and a lot of those areas are used for row crops, tomatoes, things of that nature. And who knows, maybe a couple more rain events and it would have topped over and you would have saw something that looked like a real lake. One of the things that has come up, and this will be the provocative part, is that people often ask, could we ever bring the lake back, or at least some semblance of a lake? In 2023, we got somewhat close. Keep in mind that Tulare Lake was quite a wildlife area. You read early accounts of the Indians. They were hunting beaver and otters and ducks and geese and what have you. So it was quite impressive. And there have been many attempts throughout our country to try to bring back certain species or habitat. I remember as a young planner driving up to Blue Ridge out of Yokel Valley. I was probably 25 and was at the top there and had the great opportunity to see 7 condors fly by me. Some years after that, they captured them all and began to breed them in the zoos, and they've been released. But there have been a number of success stories of bringing certain species back and or habitats. Not to say that you would try to bring back the entire lake, but there are 2 wildlife preserves on the southern end of the lake. Could you not merge those 2 wildlife preserves along with some vestige of a lake and create a unique environment that would be some semblance of what existed in the past? It seems that there's some interest on the part of the Yoket Indians to also maybe bring back portions of the lake. But obviously the lake bottom is owned by large farming interests. But there may be an opportunity under our situation where some of the land is going to have to be repurposed. And maybe there's an opportunity to repurpose some of the ag land for some kind of habitat in the lake bottom. What got agriculture really going is obviously irrigation. You got the alluvium, you got the climate, all you need is water. And so the early farming interests discovered that one could divert water from the creeks and rivers using ditches and canals. Some of the earliest ones were in the 1860s up on the Kauai. And so there was a lot of diversion activity, taking water from a surface water and diverting it to land that did not have water. And of course also the artesian well was the first way of getting water out of the ground. All you had to do is stick a pipe in and the pressure would force the water up. And then later, man invented sort of the deep vertical wells that could go down many hundreds of feet. One of the issues that I think is important to note, the table on the right there is tries to provide for the reader what are the water demands of different types of crops? We obviously are somewhat lacking in water in the valley. Some would argue we are a desert. Yet you look at some of these crops up here that have to use 4 and 5 acre feet a year, and you have to wonder, you're growing something that is very water intensive, yet we're growing it in a desert. And so that's one of the issues that we try to surface. Primarily alfalfa. Many of our nut crops are the big water guzzlers. So I thought I'd add a little interest here and get some of my farming buddies fired up. Has the Tulare Lake Basin gone nuts? We have over 1 million acres of nuts grown in the Tulare Lake Basin. Number 1 is almonds, number 2 is pistachios, and number 3 is walnuts. You probably have some pecans and what have you in there. Almonds use a lot of water. And if you look at the crop reports of the various ag commissioners in the 4 counties, much of our nut crop goes to other countries. 50% of our nut crop can be shipped to China, Korea, Canada, the EU. And so you have to wonder, are we shipping our water resources in the form of a nut to other countries? Sort of as an interesting dilemma in terms of trying to resolve the water issue. All farmers will tell you that's where the money is. I understand that. I used to grow plums, not very well. Fortunately, I got out of it. But you go where the money is, and where the money is almonds and especially pistachios. I feel sorry for the walnut folks. They used to be in tall cotton, but had a couple of downturns. So here are the 4 counties by agricultural commodities and revenue. I really didn't know all of this, but it's interesting to realize Tulare County's number 1 revenue is milk, I think followed by citrus. Yes. Fresno County is grapes. Kern County is grapes. Kings County is milk, pistachios, and cotton. Obviously, years ago, cotton was right at the top, but things have changed. But it gives you an idea, a thumbnail sketch of what's being grown here. What are the big commodities? How much revenue do they generate? And of course, agriculture is the foundation, economic foundation of the Tulare Lake Basin. So it's important to maintain agriculture. But we also have to ask the hard questions. Can we continue? The dairy is obviously the number 1 commodity in Tulare County. We have, what was it? We got a whole bunch of cows. There's a number up there, I'm squinting, but we got a lot of cows. How many of you drink almond milk? Okay, I've just sort of discovered almond milk. It seems to keep in the refrigerator a little longer, right, Dorothy? Or other milk. So we have a lot of almonds, and we're taking the almonds and making milk out of them. And you got to wonder over time, is that going to have an adverse impact on the milk industry as we transition from a dairy product to a nut product in terms of milk? So that's another question that I'm sure people will struggle with. And Milk, the production of milk and cheese takes a lot of water. You have to grow silage to feed the cattle. The cattle drink 30 to 50 gallons of water a day. And so if you compare a gallon of almond milk to a gallon of regular milk, probably the almond milk uses less water, but there's debates on both sides depending upon who's doing the analysis. Water diversions is, along with drilling into the groundwater system, was a great way to get water to your property if you did not have riparian rights. So the early guys figured it out real quick. Just give me a ditch digger and I will divert water from one of the rivers or creeks, get it to my property, and the rest is history. So if you look at that map up in the far left-hand corner, that's the Kings River drainage area, and there's probably hundreds of water diversions up there getting water from the Kings River to various agricultural interests. And speaking of water diversions, we have two unique infrastructure systems coming across the valley. The Friant Kern Canal, which diverts water from the Friant Dam all the way down to Kern County. And then we have the California Aqueduct, which diverts water from Shasta Lake all the way down over the Grapevine down into LA. And so those two waterworks, which were probably the brainchild of Pat Brown back in the 40s and 50s, a tremendous amount of money had to be footed by the state and federal governments to put in those infrastructure projects. But over time, it lit a fire under the agricultural land, because now you had additional water that you could apply to the land, and that's why we live in the richest agricultural region in the world. When I served on the local groundwater sustainability agency board, I would often look at that one chart that's blue up there that was the level of water under the city of Visalia. And I would muse with my other board members that if that were your bank account, you may want to do something dramatic because it doesn't look good in the future. And so the local groundwater sustainability agencies are preparing strategies and projects to reverse that. My question to them always is, are we moving fast enough and aggressively enough? And you only need to look at that chart to say, oh boy, we got Houston, we have a problem here. In addition to groundwater being depleted, as in under Visalia, but all over the valley, we also have a thing called land subsidence. And this is a very famous picture of a man standing next to a telephone post on the west side. And at the very top is where the land level used to be in 1945 and where it is today. Pretty dramatic. And you're probably saying, well, what is land subsidence? Essentially, if you pump water out of an aquifer, especially under the Corcoran clay layer, there's no upward pressure on that clay layer, and it compresses. And so all the land above that clay layer, where you pump the water out, drops. and it's become quite a problem close to home. The Friant-Kern Canal, which took water from Friant Dam down to Kern County, began to experience subsidence, and not just a little subsidence. In my conversations, I think they had to reduce the delivery of water down to Kern County by 50% because the canal would no longer carry the water that they were entitled to. That was fixed. I don't know if it's completely fixed. It cost many millions of dollars, and now there's even some conversation going that the fixed part is also subsiding. So time will tell whether that fix was worth it. During our droughts, we had a number of things paralleling groundwater depletion and subsidence, and that is as the groundwater level dropped, many of our communities, especially our rural communities, I call them disadvantaged communities, and we have many in Tulare County. For those that you drive around, East Orosi, Cutler Orosi, Ivanhoe, Munson, Woodville, Poplar, there's a whole bunch of them. And many of those areas are provided water with relatively shallow wells. The best example was in East Porterville during the drought. Many of the folks there that lived in the county had very shallow wells, 50, 75 feet. Once the water table dropped, there was 4,000 people that were without water in the East Porterville area. It took the city, the state, and maybe the federal government and self-help to finally get water into that area. But for many of them, they were showering at the gymnasium. They brought in containers of fresh water, and that's probably the best or the worst example of what happens in a dropping water table. Also, when the water table drops and the well goes deeper, sometimes you begin to pick up contaminants. Being a city planner up and down the valley, many of our client cities would have to fit their water systems with activated charcoal. Kingsburg had TCP 123, which doesn't mean anything to anybody, but you don't want to drink it. Down in Arvin, it was arsenic. You have nitrates, DBCP, which is a chemical they use for nematodes. And so many of our water systems are pulling up these contaminants. And the smaller disadvantaged communities really don't have the wherewithal to fit their water systems where the very expensive water treatment needs to take place. When I got out of college, I had my degree in biology, and I thought I was a pretty smart guy. And I went in to talk to an old friend of mine who will remain unnamed. He's no longer with us, but quite a knowledgeable individual in the field of water. And so we're talking, and somehow we got on water, and he said, all that water going to the ocean is wasted. So I'm a young biology guy, and I said, man, that never came up in any of my lectures. All the water going to the ocean is wasted? That can't be. Anyway, years passed, and it kept coming up. Water's going to the ocean is wasted. So I decided to do a little research on that topic, and the big one is obviously the San Joaquin River. when they put the dam up, water was diverted to the Bryant Kern Canal, and so less water was going down the San Joaquin. And when you have less water going down the San Joaquin or any river, a number of things happen. The river dries up because there's no water. It's tough to be a fish. The water temperature increases because the water is shallow. The dissolved oxygen level drops, and trout need high levels of dissolved oxygen. And oh, by the way, when the water heads to the ocean, it has this amazing ability to keep the salt water in the ocean. When you reduce the flow, it's called saltwater intrusion, and so it starts moving up the river because there's no volume of water pushing it the other way. So if you're a farmer or you have a domestic water system and all of a sudden you have this saltwater intrusion coming up, it makes for a bad day in terms of trying to properly irrigate or drink the water. In addition to that, and this is where my biology comes in, it supports a whole plant community, a whole estuary, a whole fishing industry that demands, requires a flushing of cold water with dissolved oxygen in it so that all the critters in the estuaries, in the bay, and eventually out into the ocean can survive. So I always take umbrage with people that say that the water flowing to the ocean is wasted. I think Mother Nature would have a different outlook on that particular position. In 2014, the state government said, we got a problem. We have subsidence. Our groundwater levels are dropping. The river flows are being reduced. Saltwater intrusion is occurring. Our disadvantaged communities are without water, and we need to do something. And so in 2014, state government implemented a law called SGMA, Sustainable Groundwater Management, and it was put forth to try to mitigate the list of those problem issues on the board. Subsequent to that, each watershed had its own board, groundwater management agency, of which I served on with some of my associates in the room here. And it was everybody's task to solve the problem. But first you had to understand the problem. So I had to get a lot of money and a lot of experts and a lot of three-ring binders and put all that together so that the decision makers would have a good understanding of what the problem is and how do we solve it. So now we're in 2024, 10 years later, and we're still trying to solve the problem, although I think it's become keenly aware to farming interests and urban interests that we have to do something in terms of water. Having sat on the board for 5 years and having read the news articles, it's still up in the air as to whether we're going to solve this problem. With ag interests, they are very emotional, and obviously so, because it's their economic livelihood, that don't get between me and my water right. But at the end of the day, we have a resource that is being depleted at a rate that is not sustainable, and the state said we have to do something about it. So each watershed has a number of GSAs that come up with groundwater sustainability plan. And if you read the headlines recently, the lake bottom GSAs were put on probation. There was an outcry of one of the GSAs adjacent to the Bryant Kern Canal that says, you know, we don't like your plan, we're going to go do our own plan, or we're going to join somebody else. And so we're starting to see a little upheaval, a little backstepping, if you will, of getting our arms around the problem. And it's a difficult problem because the livelihood of many people are dependent upon water. But at the end of the day, it's so like so many other resource depletion problems. East Coast, the cod's disappeared, the fishermen saying, how come I can't go fishing anymore? My livelihood depends upon it. Well, you overfished. And that occurs around the world with any kind of particular resource. And in this case, it's groundwater. So, solutions. There are many. Some will be embraced, some will not. But as the book states, the Arapaho Indians felt that you needed to make decisions based on 7 generations. We're about 5 right now, so we got 2 more generations to get it right. And the water table under the city of Visalia is not a good indicator that as to whether or not we're doing well. So we need to use less water. And how do you do that? On the city front, I don't know if any council members are in the audience, but Visalia has been very progressive in terms of its water ordinances, number of watering days, but even went further than that. It built a tertiary treatment plant that cost $145 million that created water that could be used for irrigation versus the other decision, which would have been secondary, and that water couldn't have been used totally for irrigation. And if you drive east on 198, you see those little basins out there. Those are all designed by the city of Visalia so that when we have good water years, they'll fill up with water, replenish the groundwater, and of course the city of Visalia benefits downstream. So what are the solutions? If you drive over to the coast, you'll see a couple of solutions being implemented. They're called solar fields. And instead of farming a particular commodity, the farmers are farming the sun. And that is becoming more and more evident as you drive over the coast. If you really want to see a lot of solar panels, go to the Carrizo Plain, which has 9 million panels in that area. You can actually see it from space. I got to visit one that was owned by the head of Berkshire, Warren Buffett. And it's pretty interesting. You walk in this room, there's all these computer panels. You just see this. We were there about 2, 3 o'clock. All these lines are going up, and at 3 o'clock, they all started doing this. And it was tracking the energy that was being created. And now we've taken the second step of saying we need power from 3 to 9 when we all get home and turn our air conditioners on. So now you see these battery systems that are associated with the solar panels and have the capability of holding the power for late night evenings. So solar fields, repurposing. There are a number of ways to repurpose your land. Some farmers will do it because they simply don't have enough water, so they'll fallow a portion of their land and use the water that they would use on that land and use it for the high value crops that they might be farming. But there's some other opportunities. If you look at an aerial photo of the Tulare Lake Basin, you'll see that every river is very narrow. Think about it. It's squeezed right to the edge. And there's a great opportunity to unleash that river and allow it to be wider and be more indicative of its natural form, which was a floodplain. What does that do? Number one, it opens up additional land to recharge water on. Number two, it takes land out of production, but also that land doesn't require any irrigation water. And so there's an opportunity to widen some of our rivers to use it more effectively as a floodplain. Probably the best example is the Kauai Oaks, which is like a mile wide. That's what our rivers used to look like. And now they're just squeezed into 100-foot corridors with ag on both sides. Repurposing could also involve restoration to native land, whether it's the Tulare Lake bottom or other preserves that could be added to. Again, you take land out of ag production and move it into a native state that doesn't require any groundwater. On the urban front, and this is where the planners get into it, there's called low impact development. In the old days, hopefully there's no engineers in the room, but the way to handle storm drainage water off of any development is you dig a hole, make it nice and deep, put a chain link fence around it, allow the weeds to grow around it. Maybe you get a mattress or two inside, and that's called your storm drainage basin. We've learned from that, and we realize that you can make those a little more aesthetically pleasing. You can put trails around them, and they still function the same, but they also become a public amenity for walking or riding, but also a wildlife opportunity. Along our streets, we have an opportunity to put landscape medians down them, tree line them. That does a number of things. The trees catch the water and reduces stormwater runoff. But more importantly, it improves the aesthetics of the neighborhood and also reduces the temperature. So if you're driving around Visalia and you're on a road and you look in that middle of that road and it's about 12 feet wide and it's hot and there's just dust in the middle, think of what it could be should we implement this particular program. And there's an example in a couple of slides of landscape medians. So the $64 question is, we're in 5 generations. Are we going to make it to 7? Are we going to have the political will to make difficult decisions in terms of our water resources? And are we going to have effective implementation of those various strategies? Because it's going to be extremely difficult for the farming community to contend with this, but at the end of the day, we need to do something. So that concludes my remarks, and I know there'll be very educated questions out there. So here we go.
Well, Greg, I had the privilege of reading your book. It was a very good book, and I'm a numbers guy. So I looked at that table of how many acre feet to grow something, and so 4 acre feet means 48 inches of water. Our rainfall is around 10, 12 inches of water, which means you have to get 3 feet of water from someplace else because you can't get it out of the air. And I've read your book, and the number that kept coming up that I saw for groundwater sustainability was 1 acre feet per acre. So think that one through. That is half the water you need to grow most of the crops. Like I thought olives was 3 acre feet on up. So essentially it means if we want to balance the groundwater intake so it doesn't keep sinking. I have a friend their family's been here since 1878, and they have had the same property since then. When they got the property, the water table was 10 feet down, Farmerville's Exeter area. Now it's over 100. So basically a lake of water has been taken out. So we're between, like I said, between a rock and a dry place. Because 1.8 square acre feet is what's sustainable versus what you need to grow a crop. That means if you're a farmer, half your land cannot be irrigated anymore is the bottom line. So you have to think of other things to do. Or maybe one farmer will say, well, I'll sell my water rights. So, I mean, it's a messy, hard situation. Again, we're between a rock and a dry place.
Yeah, the GSA the Mid-Cahuilla GSA, and I think maybe most of the GSAs in the Tulare Lake Basin have a water board, so you register your property and you register your crop and you register how much water you might be using. So there's an opportunity to purchase groundwater pumping rights from your neighbor to make up for that shortfall. And everybody's trying to figure out what the sustainability. It's 1.8 to 2.5, but every GSA seems to be different. But the bottom line, they're trying to come up with a number that will ensure that the groundwater system is sustainable by 2040. It's a moving number. It's not an exact science, but you had to come up with something. Yes, ma'am.
Please wait for the microphone, okay, so we can all hear you. Thank you.
Okay. I've heard some farmers say if we just build more dams, everything will be fine. Can you respond to that?
I've heard that. There's a number of economists that have done the number crunching. What's the dam? Temperance Flat, thanks. And they've done some number crunching on that in terms of the viability of expending the money and maintaining the dam. And of course, dams have a certain lifespan, right? They fill up with sediment. And I think one of the conclusions was that if we install what we call groundwater recharge basins, that we'll get more bang for our buck. So many of the irrigation districts, and in fact they've been doing it for years, probably since the 50s, where when you have a big water year like 2023, they will take their excess water and put it into the basins to recharge the groundwater system. I think you're going to see a lot more of that. In fact, when you drive around, it seems like a lot of farmers are just putting the basin right on their land there and filling it up with water to get some water credits. So I think conservation, land retirement, recharge basins, etc., will move us towards a sustainability position, but time will tell. One of the things that I came across is that, a lot of farmers say, Greg, if you'd quit allowing everybody to build those houses, we wouldn't have a water problem. Well, my calculation is 95% of the water used in the basin goes towards agriculture. About 5%, maybe 7% goes to urban interests. But with the urban interests, if you don't pay your water bill, you don't get to take a shower. It's different for the farming community. Also, we're on a sliding scale, at least of those of us in Visalia. You look at your bill, you have 3 tiers. You start off with 34 cents a cubic foot, and I think it goes up to $1.50. So as you're using more water, you're paying more money, and all of a sudden we become very conservation-minded when our water bill exceeds our house payment or something like that.
More questions? Got one over there. Melinda, you got him?
This is going to sound crazy, but do you have any idea if we involuntarily retired the 3 or 4 largest landowning interests in the lake bed, how much water that would free up for all the other real resident farmers in the basin?
You know, you could look at that chart where I actually have the amount of acres in pistachios and walnuts and what have you, and do a multiplier effect. You could get some kind of value there. In terms of the land retirement, the state government, and to a certain degree maybe the federal government and the local governments, need to come together to say, here's an opportunity to repurpose your land, but there has to be an economic incentive also. So if the state government said, we'd like to enlarge this existing preserve, we would like to buy 100 acres from you, the farmer could realize a payment from the state for selling or putting an easement on the land. But in addition to that, they would get revenue because they're not pumping water, and they can sell that pumping allocation to adjacent farmers. So there are some incentives that make sense. And we'll see if that plays out.
I have a follow-up to the dam question. Help me understand the water rights situation and the difference between water rights for groundwater, which it's my understanding that groundwater is by and large in the commons. Of course, you know, okay, well, I'll let you get into the weeds on that, but that dam water, reservoir water is surface water, and that surface water rights have a whole different ownership scenario, and that surface water is not in the commons. Is this the coming battle between groundwater and surface water rights?
Well, there's a whole legal system based on figuring out that question. Surface water rights are pretty much already allocated to various farming interests. Groundwater is unregulated, so there are no water rights there. California is different in its treatment of groundwater. Other states early on regulated the pumping of groundwater for the obvious reason that we're experiencing in the valley today. And it sets up some interesting disagreements. You know, farmers taking their water, what are they doing with it? Are they shipping it to LA? Are they shipping it to a different water district? Are they shipping it outside the basin? And there have been a number of legal challenges regarding that. Groundwater is unregulated. It's a free-for-all. You got a big well and a big pump, you can pump a heck of a lot of water. And If you're a small farmer adjacent to it, you're sort of out of it because you can't compete. And so you have that conflict also. Water is very contentious, and we're always trying to figure out the best way to manage it.
Other questions? Okay. I was going to remind everybody, we've only got about 10 minutes to go, so I don't want everybody raising their hands at 8:28, okay?
Regarding surface water, over the years, the farmers have given up a lot of their rights. I don't want to say just for environmentalists, but a lot of it's going out to the ocean and not being wasted, according to you.
Yeah.
Is there an amount of water that goes to the ocean that truly is not needed?
That's a good question. You'll have to ask the fish and the estuaries. If you look at it from a saltwater intrusion perspective, you need a certain volume going down to keep the saltwater from coming up the river. That would be one answer. And it's the type of water. If the water is warm, a lot of fish can't live in warm water because there's no dissolved oxygen. How much water you need to support the estuaries? I don't know that anybody has an answer to that, other than when the water is severely restricted in the San Joaquin River from finding its way to the Bay Area. Bad things happen, whether it's fisheries or estuaries or contaminated water well systems or saltwater intrusion.
If you look at California's export of products such as almonds and the nuts you talked about that are water intensive and hay, if you take that and you look at how much is exported, what percent of California water is exported out of the country? Do we know? Agricultural water.
Yeah. Well, if you look at just the almond, quite a bit of almonds goes to other countries, as does pistachios.
Talking about the whole thing, how much water do we export to California for agricultural water?
Have no idea. It takes a mathematician.
Yeah, Greg, how much money comes back from that exporting that's used here in this local area for the benefit of our economic development?
I was wondering when that question was going to... And my response to that is you have an agricultural system that is reliant on a resource that is being depleted. So the $64 question is, we're doing well today, but if improperly managed, the economic income that you mentioned may entirely go away. And so it's like with any resource, whether it's, how many salmon should I catch? Well, let's get the last one. And then your fisheries population is decimated and the economy based on the fisheries goes into the toilet. I think the issue is, can we get in front of this, manage our water system wisely so that in 2 more generations, the farmers that are dependent upon the water will continue to exist. There's no question that the almonds and the pistachios and the milk and what have you going to other countries benefits us economically. But is there a day when, because of our mismanagement, that economics takes a dive? It's better to be in front of it than reacting to something that is draconian in nature.
All right, Greg, thanks for writing the book. And
This is one of my editors.
No, I'm not.
Only one chapter.
Only one chapter.
And by the way, he's a guru in water, so I
Well,
listen up to him.
thanks for saying that. That's not true, but I appreciate it. There's always this question about the dams, and I think it's probably best to kind of put that in perspective. We had an era of dam building in the United States, and we sent engineers everywhere over North America to look at every potential dam site, and we built every one that we could find somebody to pay for. So the dam sites that are out there yet have all been looked at, and they've been passed over for one reason or another, mostly because they didn't make, for the most part, economic sense. So, it's not like we got great dam projects out there that if we just had the will, we could go build them. There are a few things that we could do that make some sense. Raising Shasta Dam probably makes some sense. But, on the dam question, there's not a lot of great opportunities out there. Then, when you talk about, all the water going to, the ocean is not wasted, that's certainly true. We need a constant flow of water to the ocean. But particularly in these wet years, there's enormous flows that are way in excess of anything you need for the fish or for any environmental benefit. But if you think about the way we constructed water infrastructure historically, you have up there that the taxpayers paid for it. Well, the taxpayers financed it. They financed the State Water Project, they financed the federal Central Valley Project. But then the beneficiaries of that had to pay it back and are still making payments and paying it back and paying for the operations and maintenance. So, the government is us, right? And I mean, we financed, and the Bureau of Reclamation, the 17 western states, the East Coast was doing fine economically, but they had the western part of the country back at the turn of the 19th century, and it was investing in water projects with the eye to doing economic development and building up the West. Now, my good friend Trudy makes a good point about the abuses, and there's some really outrageous stories about things that have happened that we probably aren't proud of, and we got to deal with those today. But the biggest, I think we need to be encouraged that we should have regulated our groundwater 50 years ago. We'd have avoided a lot of problems. We didn't, and so we're going in after the fact. Sigma is about allocating pain, and this is a very difficult thing for human beings to do, particularly in a democracy. So, we're struggling, but I'll tell you, 10 years in, if the people who passed it in 2014, 10 years ago, do you look at the progress that we've made in 10 years? It's absolutely remarkable. In the southern San Joaquin, where we are here, this is the driest part of the valley, and we got some really, really difficult problems to address, and they're just going to be really tough. But there's a huge commitment to doing it, and an absolute seriousness, and ag is all in, and by necessity.
Yeah.
So thanks for the book and the conversation.
My pleasure.
Fantastic.
So I have a question about, back to the dam issue. People are always talking about how, so when we have a good year like we had in 2023, we should store more of the water. And it seems that God gave us the Tulare Lake for that purpose. And it's, to say, we need a space in which to keep this water, we've got it. And unfortunately, that water got pumped out as quickly as possible. So that's, do we really know better than Mother Nature where that water should be stored?
Thank you.
Could I take a shot at that? Because I think there's a misconception here. The Tulare Lake is like the Great Salt Lake. Okay, like the Salton Sea. It's the dead end. And that was what the Tulare Lake was. It was the dead end for those four rivers that couldn't get it to the ocean. So, you know, should some part of it be brought back, and we've got the Pixley Wildlife Refuge, the Kern Wildlife Refuge, could we do something really special there? I think that's a really good conversation that we ought to start having. But as a water storage facility, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's too shallow. It gets too hot, and it just isn't really practical.
Yeah, it doesn't allow for good percolation into the groundwater system, and
Yeah, it's a hard clay thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, what's a number of acres that need to be retired to balance things?
I took a stab at that.
Okay.
There's an organization, PPIC, Public Policy for something, and there's a figure of 500,000 acres in the San Joaquin Valley. So I started with that number. The Tulare Lake Basin is half of the San Joaquin Valley, but it's the richest in terms of agriculture and water consumption. So I figured between 300 and 400,000 acres would need to come out of production, or repurposed is the better terminology, whether that's solar or nature preserves or floodway modification. I really was remiss in not mentioning two major projects that we're doing here. One by the Kauai Water Conservation District. They own a lot of land up on the Kauai near the McKay's Point, and they're going to take water in the big years and flood a certain area, which will be good for the riparian woodland. It'll be good in terms of reducing flood damage downstream, and it'll also be good for groundwater recharge. So you get 3 pluses out of that. And then Visalia is going to do a east side park, but we're starting with groundwater recharge basins. There's supposed to be landscaping put around those basins out there. And I've noticed more and more people are walking or riding around. So we mitigate flooding, we recharge the groundwater system, and we give people an opportunity for an outdoor experience. I think that's it.
I think that's it. Let's give Greg Collins a big round of applause, please. Are there any copies of his book back there? You got one left? Okay. It's like the Oklahoma Land Rush. You ready?
Double the price.
All right. Double the price, yeah. It's one night only, $50. Greg, will you sign some books?
Sure.
You want to just stay there?
I'll just stay.
Okay, good. Thank you once again. I have a couple of announcements to make, so don't go away. First of all, I would like to thank the members of our planning team, all of whom are here tonight, and thank you for all being here. I was going to announce their names, Judy. Is that okay? Okay. Donna Kinshu, there you go. Lou Griswold, Catherine Doe, Melinda Morales, who's with the mic, Miley Melconian, who is always with the mic, unfortunately. Oh, you get a chance to get back at me tomorrow, dear. You what? Another one? Oh, yeah, you want to do the announcement? Sure. All right, come on up. And Catherine Doe, excuse me, I left you for last. Lisa Alvarado is here. That's right, Lisa. Oh, yeah, back in the shadows again. Thank you, planning team, by the way, for all your work on this. By the way, we have a meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m., so no rest for the weary, where we will be planning our next forums. You have an announcement about that now?
Yes, actually. Okay.
Don't hold that for too long.
No, I'll keep it warm though. Yes, in September, instead of Tulare County Voices at 2:10, there will be a forum here on September 10th, same time And doors open 6:30, program at 7. It's the League of Women Voters of Tulare County. It will be presenting the pros and cons on the 10 propositions, state propositions that will be on your ballot. You're laughing. Yes, to give you some sense of what's going on with the propositions before your ballots arrive in very early October. Okay.
Very good. Thanks, Miley. So I believe in October we're going to tackle the issue of insurance in California. I know. So that'll be a good one, right? And those of you who'd like to be included on our emailing list, please see Melinda Morales in the back on your way out. Give her your email address, and we'll get you on our email blast list. And is that all? I think that might be all. Brian Gerhardt, thank you once again. And thanks to First Presbyterian Church and you all. Okay, go get your autograph. Go get your books autographed. Thank you.